Ira Berkow, welcome to the Bookshelf Conversation.
Well, nice to be with you.
Congratulations on your latest in a slew of books, Baseball's Best Ever, a half century of covering Hall of Famers. A half century. I mean, that is impressive. When I think of a half century, I think of people like Shirley Povich. I think of people like, well, that's just the name that comes to mind the most. You have covered so many Hall of Famers and people who didn't make the Hall of Fame. When you look back on all this, are you amazed?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm amazed that I was a sports writer at all. Coming out of the west side of Chicago, I had planned to be a lawyer. I read about another Chicago lawyer named Clarence Darrow, and I thought, it's really that's an interesting occupation. But when I went to college and I went to Miami of Ohio as a junior, and I was living across the hallway from Dave Bergen, it turned out, who I met. And Dave Bergen was the deputy sports editor of the school newspaper, which came out twice a week, called the Miami Student. And I had played sports and I knew some sports. And he said, "Why don't you write on the school paper?" And I said, "I never considered it. I wouldn't know what to ask, what to write, what to do." And so he said, the Miami team, tennis team, is playing the Xavier tennis team, and I'd like you to do a story about the Miami tennis team about to play the Xavier. And I said, "Look, I grew up on the west side of Chicago. I never played tennis. If someone on the west side saw you wearing tennis shorts, they'd beat you up." So, uh, so and he said, and so Dave said, "I'll give you the questions and you ask the questions." And so I said, "Okay." So I went and I did it. And a couple days later, the Miami Student newspaper got together in the evening with all the writers, and they would discuss what was in the paper that Tuesday of the week. And lo and behold, they started talking about the tennis story and how good it was. And this came as a huge shock to me. And then I started writing a couple of other stories, and I started getting some really good feedback. And I said, maybe I'll just keep trying this. And then at one time in Chicago, there was Red Smith was a syndicated sports writer. His flagship paper was the New York Herald Tribune, and he was the most famous and probably the best sports writer at the time and maybe ever. And I was thinking, I'd like to get good at this. If I was going to be a lawyer, I want to be Clarence Darrow. If I want to be a sports writer, I want to be Red Smith. So I wrote Red Smith two of my articles that I had done for the school paper out of the blue, sent it to the New York Herald Tribune, and asked Red Smith if he would give me some advice out of the blue. And there's a kid in Oxford, Ohio, sending it to the great Red Smith. And about a month later, I get a letter from W.W. Smith. His name is Walter Wellesley Smith, nickname Red. And he and the letter read, "Dear Ira, Berkow." A lot of people thought that Ira was even a feminine name, so my feeling is maybe he wasn't sure, so he said, "Dear Ira Berkow." And he wrote, "When I was a cub reporter in Milwaukee and writing the lead, the city editor would come by and look over my shoulder. And if he liked what he saw, he'd nod and walk away. And if he didn't, he'd say, 'Try again.' My advice to you is try again and again. If you're for this racket, and not many really are, you'll have an eternity of tears and sweat ahead." And he said, "It's not just you, it would be anybody." And he said, I was going to write in marginal criticisms, but they wouldn't have made you happy. Well, at this point, I thought any advice I can get from Red Smith, I'd be happy with. So I got those copies of 2 columns. I pasted them up on paper and on typing paper. And I folded them up in an envelope and I included a note. It was addressed, the envelope was addressed, of course, to Red Smith, or W.W. Smith. And I folded up those two pieces that I had written, sports pieces, and with a note, and the note read, "Dear Mr. Smith, please make me unhappy." And he wrote back marginal criticisms, and we began a correspondence. And it lasted until he died. And for about a year, we both worked at the New York Times together. So that was a particular treat for me. And I can conclude this with, I was writing a column at home. Red had been ill, and I was replacing him sometimes with a column in the New York Times. And I was writing it. He had been ill. I was writing a column, and I got a call from the sports editor, Joe Vecchione, and he said, "We've got some sad news. Red died, and we have an advance obituary on him, but we don't like it, and we'd like you to write the obituary on Red Smith." And I'm a professional writer, and I said, well, this is going to be difficult because Red was really important to me, and I loved him. And they said, okay, but we'd like you to write it. And I said, okay, I have information at home. And they said, no, we want you to come in the office because all over the country, people are writing in, newspaper people, journalists, writers are writing in comments about Red, and we'd like you to come in. And so I did. And I wrote it. And it was a longer obituary than is usual in the New York Times. And the next morning, I got up and I went to my front door to get the paper that's always at the front door in the morning, the Times. And I went to the obituary section. There was no Red Smith obituary. I went to the sports section, and there was no Red Smith obituary in the sports section. And I just thought, well, maybe they're holding it, or maybe they just didn't like it. And so I folded the paper back up and to the front page, and there, just below the fold on the front page, was the Red Smith obituary by Red Smith, and it was the first A1 story that I had at the New York Times. And unfortunately, it was the obituary on Red Smith.
In reading the book now, I can't help but notice how many of the people about whom you've written are no longer with us, Bruce Sutter being the most recent. And I mean, it's hard for a fan. It's hard when you get to a certain age and you realize that you don't have as many years ahead of you as you have behind you.
Who says so? Who says so?
One would hope. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Back in the day, ball players and writers were fairly even on the economic level, and I'm wondering if the change in that has changed the relationship between writers and subjects. You write about a very nice piece about Tom Seaver and traveling with him and lending a raincoat to him. And I'm just wondering if it's possible to have that kind of relationship these days.
Gee, I don't know. I retired from the Times about 15 years ago, and of course I'm still writing, but rarely do I have occasion to go into the locker room anymore, or even onto the field. But a few years ago, I had occasion to go into the locker room, and all the players, it used to be that all the players were at their lockers, sometime before a game, and you can approach them, walk over to them and talk to them. Now they're all in the trainer's room, which is off limits to the writers. So you walk in and you have other writers. Everyone is just standing around looking at empty lockers. And that was a critical change. Also, it used to be that before a game, you could go by the batting cage and stand right by the batting cage with the other players, the other hitters, and you'd hear them talk, and you can, discuss something with them. Now you can't get near the batting cage. They rope it off so that the writers can't get by the batting cage. So there is now a distance that exists now that didn't exist for most of the years that I wrote. And my first job was in 1965 with the Minneapolis Tribune, and I ended it in 2007 with the New York Times. And so there were changes. There were definitely changes. And at one point, the players weren't making that much more than you were, and you'd recommend going to dinner, and they'd say, "Great," because you were paying. Uh, so those were the changes. Now, I mean, Judge is going to make over $400 million probably for 7 years. Or, I mean, what kind of astronomical money are they making? But none of them think about taking the writer to dinner.
No, knowing now what you do you think you would have gone into this profession? Would it still hold that same charm for you?
Well, I like writing, and I like seeing my name, seeing something that I wrote in print, and I did a lot of non-sports as well. And so I think I would have wanted to be a writer, but I've also written a number of stories dealing with legal issues, and which were important to me. And so I don't think I would have wanted to be a lawyer in the end. I like traveling on the sports beat or even non-sports stories. And I've written a number of books that weren't sports stories, sports books. So I probably wouldn't have changed anything now. But it's interesting for you to pose this, that if I'm just coming out of college now, what would I do, knowing the restrictions that especially the sports writers have? And I don't know. I think that we wouldn't be used to going into a locker and talking to the players, so we'd make adjustments. And but even if without going into locker rooms, the game the other day between Seattle and Houston, at 18 inning game. I mean, what a game to write. I mean, of course, you'd miss deadline after deadline after deadline since it was 18 innings. But it's still the drama of the games, and the way the Indians won with a couple runs in the last inning to 3 runs in the last inning to beat the Yankees 6-5. That's dramatic stuff, and I think that it would still be fun. I think it'd still be fun to be a sports writer. I would worry about being online all the time and having to write to all the readers all the time. But anyway, it's an interesting question, and it may keep me awake tonight.
You ever go back and look at your very early stuff?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure, I do. But you mentioned Shirley Povich. Well, not Shirley Povich, but there was a very good writer named Cy Burek of the Dayton Daily News, and he had a collection of his pieces. And the very first piece was a dramatic World Series story, and he included it. And he forgot in that piece, he forgot to put in the score. And but when the book was collected, he still didn't put in the score. But it was I look back and many times I said, well, I could have used another word. I could have used another phrase. I could have asked another question. So uh, it's invariably, I look back on a piece and I rewrite parts of it.
Hmm, interesting. Uh,
Yeah.
Obviously it worked for you.
Once in a while, once in a while, I say, I did it today. Okay. Once in a while.
Well, once in a while turned into quite a career. Uh, I'm thinking of, you're right about these Hall of Famers and how when the voting is done and they're sitting by the phone waiting for that call to let them know that they've been elected. You are a Pulitzer Prize winner. What is that process like when you are notified that you've won the Pulitzer?
Well, when I found out, I was at the office at the Times, and the Pulitzer prizes were being announced, and it was on the third floor on 43rd Street. It's now the papers moved, but and they were getting by I guess by telephone or telex, um, the news of who's getting the Pulitzers. And then when they came to the part about how race has lived in America, and I wrote the piece about a white quarterback at a black school, and they said we got another Pulitzer Prize winner, and I didn't jump for joy, but I felt like it.
Well deserved.
Yeah, it was. It was a great moment for me.
Now, ball
Um,
players who are elected to the Hall of Fame get to write HOF when they sign their signature. Do you write something similar when you are asked to autograph something?
no, 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 I don't. My name is Ira Harvey Berkow. My middle name is Harvey, and I rarely write Harvey. And there was once I wrote Harvey without an E because I rarely write it. But it reminded me of, I was with a Yogi Bear in Cooperstown at a Hall of Fame weekend, and someone came over and asked him to sign a baseball with his full name, which was Lawrence Peter Berra. He was used to signing Yogi Berra, and so someone said, "Would you write your full name, Lawrence Peter Berra?" And Yogi got the ball and looked at it, looked at the pen, and he said, "You know, I haven't signed Lawrence Peter Berra in such a long time. I've forgotten how to spell it." And
Lawrence is a tricky name.
yeah, Lawrence is, it could be a U or a W. Yeah, but that was Yogi. Okay.
What are you working on now?
Well, doing some promotion for this book, baseball's best ever, and uh, I'm looking. I don't know if I'm 82 years old, and I don't know if I've had some health issues, but I'm okay now. And I don't know if I'll be doing any more writing. Periodically, I'll do a book review, or someone will ask me to do something. But um, I'm doing some reading, uh, and just enjoying the rest of my life at
You
82.
talk about promoting the book. You are fortunate that the book is coming out when it is, because a couple of years ago, it would have been a lot harder to promote the book. There were no
Yeah,
events. They were very difficult to do so. So timing is everything.
yeah, yeah. Um, but it's a good book, I think. It's 50 years of writing about Hall of Famers, uh, and I look back on all those years and all those players, and I tried to always do something a little bit different in my work, and I think that shows up. But I go all the way back to some stories about Babe Ruth that were told to me that that hold up, I think, and all the way into the guys who just got named to the Hall of Fame. But the stories I did, like on Jim Cott and Minnie Minoso. So it's the whole range of baseball, almost from 1902 3 to today.
It's interesting. You won your Pulitzer for the article about the white quarterback at the black school, and it just makes me think of how writing about race has changed from the time you started until modern day. I mean, there are certain words that were much more acceptable back then
Yeah.
when writing versus how does a writer change that?
Well, it used to be when I first started that you would call a black man a Negro or a colored man. Well, you never see that anymore. He's either black or he's not even brown. He's black. He's a black man, and no matter how light skinned you are, Lena Horne is black, a black woman, and she's very light skinned. So I mean that has changed. So some of the language has changed, and you have to be more respectful of women in sports. Sometimes, years ago, a male writer would be writing about a girls' softball team and a softball game, and make jokes about it. Well, you don't make jokes anymore about it, and so those are some of the changes.
Are there any,
And it's interesting. Even if you're, well, I don't know what you call Judge, for example. I think that he had one black parent and one white parent, and I haven't seen any references to his skin color. So, and it used to be someone who was black and white was called a mulatto, but you never see that word anymore either.
you never see
So
any reference to race anymore these days. The only
yeah,
You might find
yeah,
references to Hispanic players because of the language. They usually say he's so and so said something through his translator, or an Asian
yeah.
player through a translator, but you never see that
But
any
I think
race.
I think sometimes if they feel that race is an issue, that they're doing this because I'm black. I just recently ran across some reference like that. I forgot what it was, and so I can't be more direct than that. But sometimes there's still the aspect,
Well,
especially of blacks, being sensitive to race, in a way that
sure.
whites. Uh, and I wonder if like the Dominicans who don't speak really don't speak. A lot of them don't speak English, and after games, you see some of these Black Caribbean players being interviewed, but they have a translator with them. So there's the interviewer, there's the player, and there's a translator.
Mhm. Mhm. Are there any writers these days you like to follow, you admire?
Well, the New York Times has a columnist named Kurt Streeter, who's fairly new, and he's very good. I read the Times. Tyler Kepner, writing baseball is sensational, and I read some of the ESPN. Buster Olney, who used to be with the Times. I read him sometimes on ESPN. He's very good. But with fewer and fewer papers, there are fewer and fewer writers who I come across. So I get a lot of my sports knowledge, in quotes, from television.
And just as you looked up to Red Smith when you were coming along, I'm sure a lot of today's writers look up to Ira Berkow, who has come out with his new book, Baseball's Best Ever, a half century, covering Hall of Famers. Ira, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate those good questions too. It brought out the best in me, whatever that is. Thank you.